and welcome back to Living Pages. Tonight, we'll enjoy 3 different stories by 3 different authors. We will begin with The Spectre Bride by William Harrison Ainsworth. The castle of Ainsworth, at the close of the year 1655, was the resort of fashion and gaiety. The Baron of that name was the most powerful nobleman in Germany, and equally celebrated for the patriotic achievements of his sons and the beauty of his only daughter. The estate of Ainsworth, which was situated in the center of the Black Forest, had been given to one of his ancestors by the gratitude of the nation, and descended with other hereditary possessions to the family of the present owner. It was a castellated Gothic mansion, built according to the fashion of the times in the grandest style of architecture, and consisted principally of dark, winding corridors and vaulted tapestry rooms, magnificent indeed in their size, but ill-suited to private comfort from the very circumstance of their dreary magnitude. A dark grove of pine and mountain ash encompassed the castle on every side, and threw an aspect of gloom around the scene, which was seldom enlivened by the cheering sunshine of heaven. The castle bells rung out a merry peal at the approach of a winter twilight, and the warder was stationed with his retinue on the battlements to announce the arrival of the company who were invited to share the amusements that reigned within the walls. The Lady Clotilda, the Baron's only daughter, had but just attained her 17th year, and a brilliant assembly was invited to celebrate the birthday. The large vaulted apartments were thrown open for the reception of the numerous guests, and the gaieties of the evening had scarcely commenced when the clock from the dungeon tower was heard to strike with unusual solemnity. And on the instant, a tall stranger, arrayed in a deep suit of black, made his appearance in the ballroom. He bowed courteously on every side, but was received by all with the strictest reserve. No one knew who he was, or whence he came, but it was evident from his appearance that he was a nobleman of first rank, and though his introduction was accepted with distrust, he was treated with respect. He addressed himself particularly to the daughter of the Baron, and was so intelligent in his remarks, so lively in his sallies, and so fascinating in his address, that he quickly interested the feelings of his young and sensitive auditor. In fine, after some hesitation on the part of the host, who, with the rest of the company, was unable to approach the stranger with indifference, he was requested to remain a few days at the castle, an invitation which was cheerfully accepted. The dead of the night drew on, and when all had retired to rest, the dull, heavy bell was heard swinging to and fro in the gray tower, though there was scarcely a mountain breadth to move the forest trees. Many of the guests, when they met the next morning at the breakfast table, averred that there had been sounds as of the most heavenly music, while all persisted in affirming that they had heard awful noises proceeding, as it seemed, from the apartment which the stranger at that time occupied. He soon, however, made his appearance at the breakfast circle, and when the circumstances of the preceding night were alluded to, a dark smile of unutterable meaning played round his saturnine features, and then relapsed into an expression of the deepest melancholy. He addressed his conversation principally to Clotilda, And when he talked of the different climes he had visited, of the sunny regions of Italy, where the very air breathes the fragrance of flowers, and the summer breeze sighs over a land of sweets. When he spoke to her of those delicious countries, where the smile of the day sinks into the softer beauty of the night, and the loveliness of heaven is never for an instant obscured, he drew tears of regret from the bosom of his fair auditor, and for the first time she regretted that she was yet at home. Days rolled on, and every moment increased the fervor of the inexpressible sentiments with which the stranger had inspired her. He never discoursed of love, but he looked it in his language, in his manner, in the insinuating tones of his voice, and in the slumbering softness of his smile. But when he found that he had succeeded in inspiring her with favorable sentiments, a sneer of the most diabolical meaning spoke for an instant and died again on his dark-featured countenance. When he met her in the company of her parents, he was at once respectful and submissive. And it was only when alone with her, in her dark ramble through the recesses of the forest, that he assumed the guise of the more impassioned admirer. As he was sitting one evening with the Baron in the wainscoted apartment of the library, the conversation happened to turn upon supernatural agency. The stranger remained reserved and mysterious during the discussion, but when the Baron, in a jocular manner, denied the existence of spirits and satirically mocked their appearance, his eyes glowed with unearthly luster, and his form seemed to dilate to more than its natural dimensions. When the conversation had ceased, a fearful pause of a few seconds, and a chorus of celestial harmony was heard pealing through the dark forest glade. All were entranced with delight, but the stranger was disturbed and gloomy. He looked at his noble host with compassion, and something like a tear swam in his dark eye. After the lapse of a few seconds, the music died gently in the distance, and all was hushed as before. The Baron, soon after, quitted the apartment and was followed almost immediately by the stranger. He had not long been absent when an awful noise, as of a person in the agonies of death, was heard, and the Baron was discovered stretched dead along the corridors. His countenance was convulsed with pain, and the grip of a human hand was visible on his blackened throat. The alarm was given instantly. The castle searched in every direction, but the stranger was seen no more. The body of the Baron, in the meantime, was quietly committed to the earth, and the remembrance of the dreadful transaction recalled but as a thing that once was. After the departure of the stranger, who had indeed fascinated her very senses, the spirits of the gentle Clotilda evidently declined. She loved to walk early and late in the walks that he had once frequented, to recall his last words, to dwell on his sweet smile, and wander to the spot where she had once discoursed with him of love. She avoided all society, and never seemed to be happy but when left alone in the solitude of her chamber. It was then that she gave vent to her affliction in tears, and the love that the pride of maiden modesty concealed in public. So beauteous, yet so resigned was the fair mourner, that she seemed already an angel freed from the trammels of the world and prepared to take her flight to heaven. as she was one summer evening rambling to the sequestered spot that had been selected as her favorite residence, a slow step advanced toward her. She turned round, and to her infinite surprise, discovered the stranger. He stepped gaily to her side and commenced an animated conversation. "You left me," exclaimed the delighted girl, "and I thought all happiness had fled from me forever. But you return, and shall we not be happy again?" "Happy," replied the stranger, with a scornful burst of derision. "Can I ever be happy again? Can there? But excuse the agitation, my love, and impute it to the pleasure I experience at our meeting. Oh, I have many things to tell you, aye, and many kind words to receive. Is it not so, sweet one? Come, tell me truly, have you been happy in my absence?" "No. I see in that sunken eye, in those pallid cheeks, that the poor wanderer has at least gained some slight interest in the heart of his beloved. I have roamed to other climes. I have seen other nations. I have met with other females, beautiful and accomplished. But I have met with but one angel, and she is here before me. Accept this simple offering of my affection, dearest," continued the stranger, plucking a heath rose from its stem. "It is beautiful as the wild flowers that deck thy hair, and sweet is the love I bear thee." "It is sweet indeed," replied Clotilda, "but its sweetness must wither ere the night closes round. It is beautiful, but its beauty is short-lived. As the love evinced by man, let not this then be the type of thy attachment. Bring me the delicate evergreen, the sweetest flower that blossoms throughout the year, and I will say as I wreathe it in my hair, 'The violets have bloomed and died, the roses have flourished and decayed, but the evergreen is still young, and so is the love of heart.' You will not, cannot desert me. I live but in you. You are my hopes, my thoughts, my existence itself. And if I lose you, I lose my all. I was but a solitary wildflower in the wildness of nature, until you transplanted me to a more genial soil. And can you now break the fond heart you first taught to glow with passion?" "Speak not thus," returned the stranger. "It rends my very soul to hear you. Leave me, forget me, avoid me forever, or your eternal ruin must ensue. I am a thing abandoned of God and man. And did you but see the scarred heart that scarcely beats within this moving mass of deformity, you would flee me, as you would an adder in your path. Here is my heart, love. Feel how cold it is. There is no pulse that betrays its emotion, for all is chilled and dead as the friends I once knew. You are unhappy, love, and your poor Clotilda shall stay to succor you. Think not I can abandon you in your misfortunes. No! I will wander with thee through the wide world and be thy servant, thy slave, if thou wilt have it so. I will shield thee from the night winds, that they blow not too roughly on thy unprotected head. I will defend thee from the tempest that howls round, and though the cold world may devote thy name to scorn, though friends may fall off and associates wither in the grave, there shall be one fond heart who shall love thee better in thy misfortune, and cherish thee, and bless thee still. She ceased, and her blue eyes swam in tears as she turned it glistening with affection toward the stranger. He averted his head from her gaze, and a scornful sneer of the darkest, the deadliest malice passed over his fine countenance. In an instant, the expression subsided. His fixed, glassy eye resumed its unearthly chillness, and he turned once again to his companion. "It is the hour of sunset," he exclaimed, "the soft, the beauteous hour when the hearts of lovers are happy, and nature smiles in unison with their feelings. But to me, it will smile no longer. Ere the morrow dawns, I shall very far from the house of my beloved, from the scenes where my heart is enshrined, as in a sepulchre. But must I leave thee, dearest flower of the wilderness, to be the sport of a whirlwind, the prey of the mountain blast?" "No, we will not part," replied the impassioned girl. "Where thou goest, will I go. Thy home shall be my home, and thy God shall be my God." "Swear it. Swear it," resumed the stranger, wildly grasping her by the hand. "Swear to the fearful oath I shall dictate." He then desired her to kneel, and holding his right hand in a menacing attitude towards the heavens, and throwing back his dark raven locks, exclaimed in a strain of bitter imprecation with the ghastly smile of an incarnate fiend. "May the curses of an offhand god," he cried, "haunt thee, cling to thee forever, in the tempest and in the calm, and in the day and in the night, in sickness and in sorrow, in life and in death. Shouldst thou swerve from the promise thou hast made to be mine, may the dark spirits of the damned howl in thine ears the accursed chorus of fiends. May the air rack thy bosom with the quenchless flames of hell. May thy soul be as the Lazar house of corruption, where the ghost of departed pleasure sits enshrined as in a grave, where the 100-headed worm never dies, where the fire is never extinguished. May a spirit of evil lord it over thy brow, and proclaim as thou passest by, this is the abandoned of God and man. May fearful specters haunt thee in the night season. May thy dearest friends drop day by day into the grave and curse thee with their dying breath. May all that is most horrible in human nature, more solemn than language can frame or lips can utter, may this, and more than this, be thy eternal portion, shouldst thou violate the oath thou hast taken. He ceased, hardly knowing what she did. The terrified girl acceded to the awful adjuration and promised eternal fidelity to him who was henceforth to be her lord. "Spirits of the damned, I thank thee for thine assistance," shouted the stranger. "I have wooed my fair bride bravely. She is mine. Mine forever. Aye, body and soul both mine. Mine in life and mine in death. What in tears, my sweet one, ere yet the honeymoon is past? Why, indeed, thou hast cause for weeping. But when next we meet, we shall meet to sign the nuptial bond." He then imprinted a cold salute on the cheek of his young bride, and softening down the unutterable horrors of his countenance, requested her to meet him at 8 o'clock on the ensuing evening in the chapel adjoining to the castle of Ainsworth. She turned round to him with a burning sigh, as if to implore protection from himself. But the stranger was gone. On entering the castle, she was observed to be impressed with her deepest melancholy. Her relations vainly endeavored to ascertain the cause of her uneasiness, but the tremendous oath she had sworn completely paralyzed her faculties, and she was fearful of betraying herself by even the slightest intonation of her voice or the least variable expression of her countenance. When the evening was concluded, the family retired to rest, but Clotilda, who was unable to take repose from the restlessness of her disposition, requested to remain alone in the library that adjoined her apartment. All was now deep midnight. Every domestic had long since retired to rest, and the only sound that could be distinguished was the sullen howl of the ban-dog as he bayed. The waning moon, Clotilda remained in the library in an attitude of deep meditation. The lamp that burnt on the table where she sat was dying away, and the lower end of the apartment was already more than half obscured. The clock from the northern angle of the castle told out the hour of 12, and the sound echoed dismally in the solemn stillness of the night. Suddenly, the oaken door at the farther end of the room was gently lifted on its latch, and a bloodless figure, apparelled in the habiliments of the grave, advanced slowly up the apartment. No sound heralded its approach, as it moved with the noiseless steps to the table where the lady was stationed. She did not at first perceive it, till she felt a death-cold hand fast grasp in her own, and heard a solemn voice whisper in her ear, "Clotilda." She looked up. A dark figure was standing beside her. She endeavored to scream, but her voice was unequal to the exertion. Her eye was fixed, as if by magic, on the form which slowly removed the garb that concealed its countenance, and disclosed the livid eyes and skeleton shape of her father. It seemed to gaze on her with pity and regret, and mournfully exclaimed, "Clotilda, the dresses and the servants are ready. The church bell has tolled, and the priest is at the altar. But where is the affianced bride? There is room for her in the grave, and tomorrow shall she be with me." "Tomorrow?" faltered out the distracted girl. "The spirits of hell shall have registered it, and tomorrow must the bond be cancelled." The figure ceased, slowly retired, and was soon lost in the obscurity of distance. Morning, then evening arrived, and already as the hall clock struck 8, Clotilda was on her road to the chapel. It was a dark, gloomy night. Thick masses of dun clouds sailed across the firmament, and the roar of the winter wind echoed awfully through the forest trees. She reached the appointed place. A figure was in waiting for her. It advanced, and discovered the features of the stranger. "Well, this is well, my bride," he exclaimed with a sneer. "And well I will repay thy fondness. Follow me." They proceeded together in silence through the winding avenues of the chapel, until they reached the adjoining cemetery. Here they paused for an instant, and the stranger, in a softened tone, said, "But one more hour, and the struggle will be over. And yet, this heart of incarnate malice can feel when it devotes so young, so pure a spirit to the grave. But it must be." He proceeded as the memory of her past love rushed on her mind. "For the fiend whom I obey has so willed it. Poor girl, I am leading thee indeed to our nuptials, but the priest will be death. Thy parents, the mouldering skeletons that rot in heaps around. And the witnesses to our union, the lazy worms that revel on the carious bones of the dead. Come, my young bride, the priest is impatient for his victim." As they proceeded, a dim blue light moved swiftly before them, and displayed at the extremity of the churchyard the portals of a vault. It was open, and they entered it in silence. The hollow wind came rushing through the gloomy abode of the dead, and on every side were piled the moldering remnants of coffins, which dropped piece by piece upon the damp mud. Every step they took was on a dead body, and the bleached bones rattled horribly beneath their feet. In the center of the vault rose a heap of unburied skeletons, whereon was seated a figure too awful even for the darkest imagination to conceive. As they approached it, the hollow vault rung with a hellish peal of laughter, and every moldering corpse seemed endued with unholy life. The stranger paused, and as he grasped his victim in his hand, one sigh burst from his heart, one tear glistened in his eye. It was but for an instant. The figure frowned awfully at his vacillation and waved his gaunt hand. The stranger advanced. He made certain mystic circles in the air, uttered unearthly words, and paused in excess of terror. On a sudden, he raised his voice and wildly exclaimed, "Spouse of the spirit of darkness, a few moments are yet thine, that thou mayest know to whom thou hast consigned thyself. I am the undying spirit of the wretch who cursed his Savior on the cross. He looked at me in the closing hour of his existence, and that look hath not yet passed away. For I am cursed above all on earth. I am eternally condemned to hell, and I must cater for my master's taste till the world is parched, as is a scroll, and the heavens and the earth have passed away. I am he of whom thou mayest have read, and of whose feats thou mayest have heard. 1,000,000 souls has my master condemned me to ensnare, and then my penance is accomplished, and I may know the repose of the grave. Thou art the 1,000th soul that I have damned. I saw thee in thine hour of purity, and I marked thee at once for my home. Thy father did I murder for his temerity, and I permitted to warn thee of thy fate, and myself have I beguiled for thy simplicity. Ha! The spell works bravely, and thou shalt soon see, my sweet one, to whom thou hast linked thine undying fortunes. For as long as the seasons shall move on their course of nature, as long as the lightning shall flash and the thunders roll, thy penance shall be eternal. Look below and see to what thou art destined. She looked. The vault split in 1,000 different directions. The earth yawned asunder, and the roar of mighty waters was heard. A living ocean of molten fire glowed in the abyss beneath her, and blending with the shrieks of the damned and the triumphant shouts of the fiends, rendered horrors more horrible than imagination. 10 millions of souls were writhing in the fiery flames, and as the boiling billows dashed them against the blackened rocks of adamant, they cursed with the blasphemies of despair, and each curse echoed in thunder across the wave. The stranger rushed towards his victim. For an instant, he held her over the burning vista, looked fondly at her face, and wept as he were a child. This was but the impulse of a moment. Again, he grasped her in his arms, dashed her from him with fury, and as her last parting glance was cast in the kindness on his face, shouted aloud, "Not mine is the crime, but the religion that thou professed. For is not said that there is a fire of eternity prepared for the souls of the wicked? And hast not thou incurred its torments?" She, poor girl, heard not, heeded not the shouts of the blasphemer. Her delicate form bounded from rock to rock, over billow and over foam. As she fell, the ocean lashed itself as it were in triumph to receive her soul. And as she sunk deep in the burning pit, 10,000 voices reverberated from the bottomless abyss. "Spirit of evil, here indeed is an eternity of torments prepared for thee, for here the worm never dies, and the fire is never quenched." Next we have Outside the Door by E.F. Benson. The rest of the small party staying with my friend Geoffrey Aldwych in the charming old house which he had lately bought at a little village of Sheringham on the Norfolk coast had drifted away soon after dinner to bridge and billiards. And Mrs. Aldwych and myself had for the time been left alone in the drawing room, seated one on each side of a small round table, which we had very patiently and unsuccessfully been trying to turn. But such pressure, physical or psychical, as we had put on it, though of the friendliest and most encouraging nature, had not overcome in the smallest degree the very slight inertia which so small an object might have been supposed to possess. And it had remained as fixed as the most constant of the stars. No tremor even had passed through its slight and spindle-like legs. In consequence, we had, after a really considerable period of patient endeavor, left it to its wooden repose, and proceeded to theorize about physical matters instead, with no stupid table to contradict in practice all our ideas on the subject. This I had added with a certain bitterness born of failure. For if we could not move so insignificant an object, we might as well give up all idea of moving anything. But hardly were the words out of my own mouth when there came from the abandoned table a single, peremptory rap, loud and rather startling. "What's that?" I asked. "Only a rap," said she. "I thought something would happen before long." "And do you really think that is a spirit rapping?" I asked. "Oh dear, no. I don't think it has anything whatever to do with spirits. More perhaps with the very dry weather we have been having. Furniture often cracks like that in the summer." Now this, in point of fact, was not quite the case. Neither in summer nor in winter have I ever heard furniture crack as the table had cracked. For the sound, whatever it was, did not at all resemble the husky creak of contracting wood. It was a loud, sharp crack, like the smart concussion of one hard object with another. No, I don't think it had much to do with dry weather either, said she, smiling. I think, if you wish to know, that it was the direct result of our attempt to turn the table. Does that sound nonsense? At present, yes, said I. Though I have no doubt that if you tried, you could make it sound sense. There is, I notice, a certain plausibility about you and your theories. Now you are being merely personal, she observed. For the good motive to goad you into explanations and enlargements. Please, go on. Let us stroll outside, said she, and sit in the garden, if you are sure you prefer my plausibilities to bridge. It is deliciously warm, and the darkness will be more suitable for the propagation of cycled phenomena, as at seances, said I. Oh, there is nothing psychical about my plausibilities, said she. The phenomena, I mean, are purely physical, according to my theory. So we wandered out into the transparent half-light of multitudinous stars. The light crimson feather of sunset, which had hovered long in the west, had been blown away with the breath of the night wind, and the moon would presently rise, had not yet cut the dim horizon of the sea, which lay very quiet, breathing gently in its sleep with stir of whispering ripples. Across the dark velvet of the close-cropped lawn, which stretched seawards from the house, blew a little breeze full of the savor of salt and the freshness of night, with, every now and then, a hint so subtly conveyed as to be scarcely perceptible of its travel across the sleeping fragrance of drowsy garden beds, over which the white moths hovered, seeking their night honey. The house itself, with its two battlemented towers of Elizabethan times, gleamed with many windows, and we passed out of sight of it and into the shadow of a box hedge, clipped into shapes and monstrous fantasies, and found chairs by the striped tent at the top of the sheltered bowling alley. And this is all very plausible, said I. Theories, if you please, at length, and, if possible, a full-length illustration also. By which you mean a ghost story, or something to that effect. Precisely. And without presuming to dictate, if possible, firsthand. Well, oddly enough, I can supply that also, said she. So first, I will tell you my general theory, and follow it by a story that seems to bear it out. It happened to me, and it happened here. I am sure it will fit the bill, said I. She paused a moment while I lit a cigarette, and then began in her very clear, pleasant voice. She has the most lucid voice I know, and to me, sitting there in the deep dyed dusk, the words seemed the very incarnation of clarity, for they dropped into the still quiet of the darkness, undisturbed by impressions conveyed to other senses. We are only just beginning to conjecture, she said. How inextricable is the interweaving between mind, soul, life, call it what you will, and the purely material part of the created world. That such interweaving existed has, of course, been known for centuries. Doctors, for instance, knew that a cheerful, optimistic spirit on the part of their patients conduced towards recovery. That fear, the mere emotion, had a definite effect on the beat of the heart. That anger produced chemical changes in the blood. That anxiety led to indigestion. That under the influence of strong passion, a man can do things which in his normal state he is physically incapable of performing. Here we have mind, in a simple and familiar manner, producing changes and effects in tissue, in that which is purely material. By an extension of this, though, indeed, it is scarcely an extension, we may expect to find that mind can have an effect, not only on what we call living tissue, but on dead things, on pieces of wood or stone. At least, it is not hard to see why that should not be so. Table turning, for instance, I asked. That is one instance of how some force, out of that innumerable cohort of obscure, mysterious forces with which we human beings are garrisoned, can pass, as it is constantly doing, into material things. The laws of its passing we do not know. Sometimes we wish it to pass, and it does not. Just now, for instance, when you and I tried to turn the table, there was some impediment in the path, though I put down the ramp, which followed as an effect of our efforts. But nothing seems more natural to my mind than that these forces should be transmissible to inanimate things. Of the matter of its passing, we know next to nothing, any more than we know the manner of the actual process by which fear accelerates the beating of the heart. But as surely as a macaroni message leaps along the air by no visible or tangible bridge, so through some subtle gateway of the body, these forces can march from the citadel of the spirit into material forms. Whether that material is a living part of ourselves, or that we choose to call inanimate nature. She paused a moment. Under certain circumstances, she went on, it seems that the force which has passed from us into inanimate things can manifest its presence there. The force that passes into a table can show itself in movements or in noises coming from the table. The table has been charged with psychical energy. Often and often I have seen a table or a chair move apparently of its own accord, but only when some outpouring of force, animal magnetism, call it what you will, has been received by it. A parallel phenomenon, to my mind, is exhibited in what we know as haunted houses. Houses in which, as a rule, some crime or act of extreme emotion or passion has been committed, and in which some echo or reenactment of the deed is periodically made visible or audible. A murder has been committed, let us say, and the room where it took place is haunted. The figure of the murdered, or less commonly, of the murderer, is seen there by sensitives, and cries are heard, or steps run to and fro. The atmosphere has somehow been charged with the scene, and the scene in whole or part repeats itself, though under what laws we do not know, just as a phonograph will repeat, when properly handled, what has been said into it. This is all theory, I remarked, but it appears to me to cover a curious set of facts, which is all we ask of a theory. Otherwise, we must frankly state our disbelief in haunted houses altogether, or suppose that the spirit of the murdered, poor wretch, is bound under certain circumstances to reenact the horror of its body's tragedy. It was not enough that its body was killed there, Its soul has to be dragged back and live through it all again with such vividness that its anguish becomes visible or audible to the eyes or ears of the sensitive. That to me is unthinkable, whereas my theory is not. Do I make it all clear? It is clear enough, said I, but I want support for it. The full-sized illustration. I promised you that. A ghost story of my own experience. Mrs. Aldwych paused again, and then began the story which was to illustrate her theory. It is just a year, she said, since Jack bought this house from old Mrs. Dennison. We had both heard, both he and I, that it was supposed to be haunted, but neither of us knew any particulars of the haunt whatever. A month ago, I heard what I believed to have been the ghost, and when Mrs. Dennison was staying with us last week, I asked her exactly what it was and found it tallied completely with my experience. I will tell you my experience first and give her account of the haunt afterwards. A month ago, Jack was away for a few days, and I remained here alone. One Sunday evening I, in my usual health and spirits, as far as I am aware, both of which are serenely excellent, went up to bed about 11. My room is on the first floor, just at the foot of the staircase that leads to the floor above. There are 4 more rooms on my passage, all of which that night were empty, and at the far end of it a door leads into the landing at the top of the front staircase. On the other side of that, as you know, are more bedrooms, all of which that night were also unoccupied. I, in fact, was the only sleeper on the first floor. The head of my bed is close behind my door, and there is an electric light over it. This is controlled by a switch at the bed head, and another switch there turns on a light in the passage just outside my room. That was Jack's plan. If by chance you want to leave your room when the house is dark, you can light up the passage before you go out and not grope blindly for a switch outside. Usually I sleep solidly. It is very rarely indeed that I wake once I have gone to sleep. But that night I woke, which was rare. What was rarer was that I woke in a state of shuddering and unaccountable terror. I tried to localize my panic, to run it to earth and reason it away, but without any success. Terror of something I could not guess had stared me in the face, white, shaking terror, so as there was no use in lying quaking in the dark. I lit my lamp, and with the view of composing this strange disorder of my fear, began to read again in the book I had brought up with me. The volume happened to be The Green Carnation, a work one would have thought to be full of tonic to twittering nerves. But it failed of success, even as my reasoning had done, and after reading a few pages and finding that the heart hammer in my throat grew no quieter, and that the grip of terror was in no way relaxed, I put out my light and lay down again. I looked at my watch, however, before doing this, and remember that the time was 10 minutes to 2. Still, matters did not mend terror. That was slowly becoming a little more definite. Terror of some dark and violent deed that was momentarily drawing nearer to me held me in its vice. Something was coming, the advent of which was perceived by the subconscious sense, and was already conveyed to my conscious mind. And then the clock struck 2 jingling chimes, and the stable clock outside clanged the hour more sonorously. I still lay there, abject and palpitating. Then I heard a sound just outside my room on the stairs that lead, as I have said, to the second story. A sound which was perfectly commonplace and unmistakable. Feet, feeling their way in the dark, were coming downstairs to my passage. I could hear also the groping hand slip and slide along the banisters. The footfalls came along the few yards of passage between the bottom of the stairs and my door. And then, against my door itself, came the brush of drapery, and on the panels the blind groping of fingers. The hand rattled as they passed over it, and my terror nearly rose to screaming point. Then a sensible hope struck me. The midnight wanderer might be one of the servants, ill or in want of something. And yet, why the shuffling feet and the groping hand? But on the instant of the dawning of that hope, for I knew that it was of the step and that which was moving in the dark passage of which I was afraid, I turned on both the light at my bedhead and the light of the passage outside, and opening the door, looked out. The passage was quite bright from end to end, but it was perfectly empty. Yet, as I looked, seeing nothing of the walker, I still heard the shuffling, growing fainter as it receded, until, judging by the ear, it turned into the gallery at the end and died away. And with it, there died also all my sense of terror. It was it of which I had been afraid. Now it and my terror had passed, and I went back to bed and slept till morning. Again, Mrs. Allwich paused, and I was silent. Somehow, it was in the extreme simplicity of her experience that the horror lay. She went on almost immediately. Now, for the sequel, she said, of what I choose to call the explanation. Mrs. Dennison, as I told you, came down to stay with us not long ago, and I mentioned that we had heard, though only vaguely, that the house was supposed to be haunted, and asked for an account of it. This is what she told me. In the year 1610, the heiress to the property was a girl, Helen Dennison, who was engaged to be married to young Lord Southern. In case thereof, her having children, the property would pass away from the Dennisons. In case of her death childless, it would pass to her first cousin. A week before the marriage took place, he and a brother of his entered the house, riding here from 30 miles away, after dark, and made their way to her room on the second story. There, they gagged her and attempted to kill her, but she escaped from them, groped her way along this passage and into the room at the end of the gallery. They followed her there and killed her there. The facts were known by the younger brother, turning King's evidence. Now, Mrs. Dennison told me that the ghost had never been seen, but that it was occasionally heard coming downstairs or going along the passage. She told me that it was never heard except between the hours of 2 and 3 in the morning, the hour during which the murder took place. And since then, have you heard it again? I asked. Yes, more than once, but it has never frightened me again. I feared, as we all do, what was unknown. I feel that I should fear the known, If I knew it was that, said I. I don't think you would for long. Whatever theory you adopt about it, the sounds of the steps and the groping hand, I cannot see that there is anything to shock or frighten one. My own theory, you know. Please, apply it to what you have heard, I asked. Simple enough. The poor girl felt her way along this passage in the despair of her agonized terror, hearing, no doubt, the soft footsteps of her murderers gaining on her as she groped along her lost way. The waves of that terrible brainstorm raging within her impressed themselves in some subtle yet physical manner on the place. It would only be by those people whom we call sensitives that the wrinkles, so to speak, made by those breaking waves on the sands would be perceived. And by them, not always, but they are there, even as when a Marconi apparatus is working, the waves are there, though they can only be perceived by a receiver that is in tune. If you believe in brainwaves at all, the explanation is not so difficult. Then the brainwave is permanent. Every wave of whatever kind leaves its mark, does it not? If you disbelieve the whole thing, shall I give you a room on the route of that poor, murdered, harmless walker? I got up. I'm very comfortable, thanks, where I am, I said. We move on now to A Vine on a House by AMBROSE BIERCE. About 3 miles from the little town of Norton in Missouri, on the road leading to Maysville, stands an old house that was last occupied by a family named Harding. Since 1886, no one has lived in it, nor is anyone likely to live in it again. Time and the disfavor of persons dwelling thereabout are converting it into a rather picturesque ruin. An observer, unacquainted with its history, would hardly put it into the category of haunted houses. Yet, in all the region round, such is its evil reputation. Its windows are without glass, its doorways without doors, there are wide breaches in the shingle roof, and for lack of paint, the weatherboarding is a dun gray. But these unfailing signs of the supernatural are partly concealed and greatly softened by the abundant foliage of a large vine overrunning the entire structure. This vine, of a species which no botanist has ever been able to name, has an important part in the story of the house. The Harding family consisted of Robert Harding, his wife Matilda, Miss Julia Went, who was her sister, and 2 young children. Robert Harding was a silent, cold-mannered man who made no friends in the neighborhood and apparently cared to make none. He was about 40 years old, frugal and industrious, and made a living from the little farm which is now overgrown with brush and brambles. He and his sister-in-law were rather tabooed by their neighbors, who seemed to think that they were seen too frequently together. Not entirely their fault, for at these times they evidently did not challenge observation. The moral code of rural Missouri is stern and exacting. Mrs. Harding was a gentle, sad-eyed woman, lacking a left foot. At some time in 1884, it became known that she had gone to visit her mother in Iowa. That was what her husband said in reply to inquiries, and his manner of saying it did not encourage further questioning. She never came back. And 2 years later, without selling his farm or anything that was his, or appointing an agent to look after his interests, or removing his household goods, Harding and the rest of the family left the country. Nobody knew whither he went. Nobody at that time cared. Naturally, whatever was movable about the place soon disappeared, and the deserted house became haunted in the manner of its kind. One summer evening, 4 or 5 years later, the Reverend J. Gruber of Norton and a Maysville attorney named Hyatt met on horseback in front of the Harding place. Having business matters to discuss, they hitched their animals and, going to the house, sat on the porch to talk. Some humorous reference to the somber reputation of the place was made and forgotten as soon as uttered, and they talked of their business affairs until it grew almost dark. The evening was oppressively warm, the air stagnant. Presently, both men started from their seats in surprise. A long vine that covered half the front of the house had dangled its branches from the edge of the porch, and above them was visibly and audibly agitated, shaking violently in every stem and leaf. "We shall have a storm," Hyatt exclaimed. Gruber said nothing, but silently directed the other's attention to the foliage of adjacent trees, which showed no movement. Even the delicate tips of the boughs, silhouetted against the clear sky, were motionless. They hastily passed down the steps to what had been a lawn and looked upward at the vine, whose entire length was now visible. It continued in violent agitation, yet they could discern no disturbing cause. "Let us leave," said the minister. And leave they did. Forgetting that they had been traveling in opposite directions, they rode away together. They went to Norton, where they related their strange experience to several discreet friends. The next evening, at about the same hour, accompanied by 2 others whose names are not recalled, they were again on the porch of the Harding house, and again the mysterious phenomenon occurred. The vine was violently agitated while under the closest scrutiny from root to tip. Nor did their combined strength applied to the trunk serve to still it. After an hour's observation, they retreated no less wise, it is thought, than when they had come. No great time was required for these singular facts to rouse the curiosity of the entire neighborhood. By day and by night, crowds of persons assembled at the Harding house seeking a sign. It does not appear that any found it. Yet so credible were the witnesses mentioned that none doubted the reality of the manifestations of which they had testified. By either a happy inspiration or some destructive design, it was one day proposed, nobody appeared to know from whom the suggestion came, to dig up the vine. And after a good deal of debate, this was done. Nothing was found by the root. Yet, nothing could have been more strange. 5 or 6 feet from the trunk, which had at the surface of the ground a diameter of several inches, it ran downward, single and straight, into a loose, friable earth. Then, it divided and subdivided into rootlets, fibers, and filaments, most curiously interwoven. When carefully freed from the soil, they showed a singular formation. In their ramifications and doublings back upon themselves, they made a compact network, having in size and shape an amazing resemblance to the human figure. Head, trunk, and limbs were there. Even the fingers and toes were distinctly defined, and many professed to see in the distribution and arrangement of the fibers in the globular mass representing the head a grotesque suggestion of a face. The figure was horizontal. The smaller roots had begun to unite at the breast. In point of resemblance to the human form, this image was imperfect. At about 10 inches from one of the knees, the cilia forming that leg had abruptly doubled backwards and inward upon their course of growth. The figure lacked the left foot. There was but one inference, the obvious one. But in the ensuing excitement, as many courses of action were proposed, as there were incapable counselors, the matter was settled by the sheriff of the county, who, as the lawful custodian of the abandoned estate, ordered the root replaced and the excavation filled with the earth that had been removed. Later inquiry brought out only one fact of relevancy and significance. Mrs. Harding had never visited her relatives in Iowa, nor did they know that she was supposed to have done so. Of Robert Harding and the rest of his family, nothing is known. The house retains its evil reputation, but the replanted vine is as orderly and well-behaved as vegetable as a nervous person could wish to sit under in a pleasant night. When the katydids grate out their immemorial revelation, and the distant whippoorwill signifies his notion of what ought to be done about it. Thank you for joining us tonight on Living Pages. Stay safe out there, and I hope to see you again soon.